Hello, conscious viewers. Welcome to another amazing reality sandwich share your experience interview. I'm Kyle here, and I'm joined today by the wonderful Diego Ugaldi. Diego, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on, brother. Appreciate it.
Of course, want to congratulate you on your new book launch, Leading from the Deep, and wanted to, if you don't mind, could you give a brief, short introduction to yourself to our audience for those who may not know you?
Yeah, so I retired out of the SEAL teams back in 2018. And when I was kind of transitioning out of the military and into the civilian workforce, I didn't necessarily know what I was going to do with my life. But one of the things that kind of kept hovering around my mind was I was always asked this question so often from corporate executives, which is how is it that SEALs work and communicate so well together? And I had answers for that, but I also found myself adding things that I knew well that we didn't do in the teams, like emotional intelligence and connection to humanity, that kind of thing. So when I finally settled on what I wanted to do, I was like, why don't we start a company that answers that question in the way that I have always wanted to answer it? And so we started the Trident approach, and we were in business for about a year doing coaching and keynotes and leadership training events and that kind of thing. And then in 2019, one of my pathfinders introduced me to the world of psychedelics, and through a mechanism of an organization that takes SEALs down to Mexico and treats their traumatic brain injury, suicidal ideation, um, post-traumatic stress, and all of that with psychedelics. And it actually was very surprising to me because up until then, I'd never really heard psychedelics being used in the context of mental health. So um, I went down, I got introduced, and I actually ended up going through the medicine myself, 5-MeO DMT, as it turns out. And, just in an instant, I had the opportunity to learn that everything I thought I knew about myself and the world around me was just not so. And so I ended up kind of serving on two paths. That medicine journey had such a huge impact on me in the community. Obviously, they were serving had such a huge impact on me that I continued kind of serving down that road while I was working down the road of the Trident approach. But after I'd become a psychedelic integration coach and I started, we were already coaching executives, but now we were coaching veterans and that kind of thing. I started to see all this connective tissue that psychedelics had on leadership. And so I still am a psychedelic integration coach for veterans, specifically through the organization known as Heroic Hearts Project. But we've also kind of shifted the focus of the Trident approach a little bit. So today, what we do is we share what we learned in the SEAL teams, combined with our deepest insights from psychedelic medicine use and how to lead the self in elite teams. And so to come full circle with your question, that's kind of what our book is precisely about, is sharing the best of what we learn in the teams, getting introduced into psychedelics, putting psychedelics in leadership in connection with each other, and then seeing what sort of comes from there. And so that's where we are.
Beautiful, and just want to congratulate you again on your mission and what you're doing because for the veteran community this is really important medicine. Before we dive into that first 5-MeO DMT experience, I'd love to hear more about your journey with the Navy SEALs and the military. When you were a teenager, is did you know that's what you wanted to do? How did you start your career with that?
I did terribly in school. I had my own kind of childhood trauma things that I experienced, and the way that sort of manifested into my outward life was just not doing well in school. In fact, sometimes I would just be sitting in class and my nose would just start gushing blood from just my inability to kind of deal with my mind and things. And luckily, because of all those nosebleeds, I always had to go to the nurse's office, and our high school nurse was phenomenal, and we had just the best relationship ever. She was more like a mother figure to me. My own mom had left and all that, and so we would just spend hours just in her office, just talking about all kinds of things. And I used to go to her when I had really bad report cards and just try to develop strategies on how I was going to break the news to my dad. And one day, after about the fourth or fifth like super bad report card in a row over the span of good while. She's like, Jay, what do you want to do with your life, do you think? And I said, I think I want to be a doctor. She's like, well, bro, doctors have to go to school for a long time. You hate school. She's like, do you know what a paramedic is? I was like, no, what's that? And she's like, well, they kind of ride around in ambulances and they save lives out on the street, but then they take the patients back to the hospitals and hand them off for the doctors there. But instead of going to school for 10 years, you go to school for like 10 months. And I was like, oh my God, that freaked me out. I was like, that's the thing. That's what I want to do. And so that kind of became my life. And then one day I saw the movie Navy SEALs, and I'm just watching these guys jump out of planes, driving fast cars, shooting guns, going after bad guys and all that. And about 20 minutes into the movie, I realized that they had a paramedic on their team, and I was like, that's it. That's all. That's exactly what I want to do. And yeah, that's how I initially got. So I think I was 16 or 17 at the time, and that began, this huge saga. We're finally at the age of 29. I actually made it through training, but yeah, that's how I got interested in it.
Wonderful. Well, it sounds like it was a really great outlet for you, and really brought the structure that maybe you were craving.
Yeah, maybe the structure could be, and for sure, it was the whole idea of family that I never really felt like I had the opportunity to experience in the way that I wanted to, and the brotherhood. And it was very obvious and clear to me after seeing the movie and doing, there wasn't any internet back then, but doing what little research I did, it just didn't seem like there was such a thing as a tighter community than the SEAL community. And so I felt like if I could do that and be, part of that family, there there could be no better way. And and plus I had this ingrained interest and talent in a way in medicine as well. So being able to combine all those things together was just like, you couldn't imagine doing anything else at the time.
Now, prior to you joining the SEALs, and even your post career, what was your experience with plant medicines? Did you try cannabis as a teenager? What was your education with anything related to that?
No education. I smoked marijuana a few times. I didn't really take to it, really. And I don't know, just I much preferred alcohol to just check out, and do that thing. I got really good at drinking, but I never did psychedelics. That is until I went down to Mexico with the Mission Within, after I got out of the military entirely. Um, I just didn't have any education or really awareness built around plant medicine in any way.
Gotcha. So now what your get out of the Navy SEALs. Were you feeling like an emptiness after that? What was your plan kind of post that experience for a career, or what did you want to get in? Did you want to go back to being an EMT?
Well, yeah, that was crazy because I joined the Navy like literally less than a month after I turned 18, and right out of high school, with the sole purpose of becoming a SEAL. And I didn't find out until after I was in boot camp that I failed this test that you needed to score a certain level on in order to even qualify to apply to SEAL training. And so that was like this huge heartbreak. And they said, hey, if you actually want to be a SEAL, you got to do all this work, and 2 years of work, as it turns out, and then you can apply again. So I made it through boot camp. I went through like a trade school, was medicine, and then I went on to work in a labor and delivery unit for 2 years. And all that time, I had to take classes and study and do this stuff so that I could finally retake that test. I retook the test. I passed it this time, and then I had to take like the SEAL screening test, the physical fitness of like running, swimming, push-ups, and all that stuff. I failed that. Uh, Took it again, failed it again, passed it the third time, and finally made it to, after over 2 years of retaking things. I finally made it to SEAL training. Um, I was 20 years old at the time, but I was really more like 12 years old in terms of my maturity and things. And I just wasn't ready. Mentally, I wasn't ready. Physically, I wasn't ready in a whole bunch of ways. And so I showed up and I literally failed every single time. I passed enough to get into training, but then I failed every time run we had while I was there. And my legs were breaking, and they ended up getting full stress fractures and all of this stuff. But at the same time, I was telling you about my maturity. Like it just didn't dawn on me that I wouldn't be successful somehow. It was the weirdest thing. And Friday before Hell Week, we were getting ready to do like this 5.5 days straight of training, no sleep, really. And they pulled me into the office and said, "Hey, you failed every time run we've had. It's just not, you're not welcome here anymore." So they kicked me out of training. And like that was hugely devastating. If I was devastated when I found out that I didn't score high enough to pass the test to even apply, this was 15 times worse, more than that. It was absolutely devastating. And so I ended up leaving SEAL training, going to become a medic with the Marines. It's kind of a long story, but the Marines get their medics from the Navy. It's been that way since the Marine Corps existed. It's just really time-honored tradition. So I went to be a medic with the Marines for a couple of years, and then my enlistment contract came up, and I joined the Navy to be a SEAL. I wasn't a SEAL, so I decided to get out. I became a civilian paramedic. I worked all over the place, Massachusetts, Florida, Hawaii. But that whole time was like a span of like 8 years. And over the span of those 8 years, I would have no less than 3 really crappy dreams a month about not making it through SEAL training. And one day I finally had that dream again, but for the last time, I was like, man, the only way these dreams are going to stop is if I go back. So first time I was in SEAL training, I was 20, legs busted and all that. I had 29 and decided I'm going back. I went back, and this time I made it through. I separated my shoulder halfway through training and herniated a disc in my neck and all that stuff, but I was able to make it through anyway. And so at the age of 30, I went on to SEAL Team 2. I went to Iraq a bunch of times. Never had to take any lives, but I saved some lives while I was there. And I was trained and mentored by some of the most amazing humans I've ever met. And as I kind of rose through the ranks, I also got the opportunity to train and mentor other most amazing people I've ever met. And I made it to the rank of senior chief, which is kind of high up there. And at my 20-year mark, and I decided to retire. To answer your question, I had this idea that I would be standing on top of this mountain of like this 30-year saga of breaking bones and bleeding and cuts and everything, failure, everything, that fireworks would be erupting out of the ground underneath me and confetti would be falling from the sky. Like that's what I sort of assumed what would be happening. And literally nothing could have been further from the truth. I was at the top of some mountain, but it was dead quiet. And I was nearly angry. I just couldn't believe that I had been through so much, conquered all these demons. I had so many conversations with people who heard my story and said, dude, you literally are living the epitome of what it is to be a human being kind of stuff. And I was just like, this can't be it, because this sucks. But the goodness about that whole thing was that it taught me something that I had never considered before, and that was to look finally to turn inward. Everything I had been pursuing or whatever in life was all external, titles or whatever. But I'd never looked inside. And at the time where I recognized that, it was funny because I didn't even really know what that meant. But it was like the one place I never looked. And so I just kind of went on blindly with just this notion of, hey, you got to turn inward sort of thing. And then I did psychedelics for the first time, and it was like, oh, this is what they mean by inward. Okay, and this is what they mean by, looking at this, what they mean even by the self and all of this. It just changed everything. And then, yeah, I was off to the races, but like in a rocket. I just launched,
Wow.
and it was because of psychedelics that I was able to experience that. I would have never been able to like think of that in my life. It just wouldn't have been possible. So yeah.
That's, beautiful story. I think a lot of people go through that of ticking off these boxes or in their life or accomplishing a goal and getting to that goal post and realizing, is there more, or that wasn't the satisfying feeling that I was hoping for. So curious, you get out of the SEALs, you've accomplished this mission, but now you're feeling, still a bit lost perhaps. How did you get introduced to this first, psychedelic experience? How did you come across this particular journey you were about to go on, and what was that first medicine like?
So one day the Trident approach was, we were doing our operational stuff, and one of my pathfinders said, "Hey, I'm not coming into work next week. There's an organization that takes SEALs down to Mexico and treats their TBI and suicide and all that stuff with psychedelics." Like I said, I was pretty shocked, but at the same time, I didn't care because I knew he was smacked up pretty good with PTS, and he's addicted to Ambien and all of this stuff. And I'm like, brother, do what you got to do. Can't wait to see you when you get back. So he took off for the week, and he came back, and he had a light in his eyes and a vibrancy to his smile none of us had ever seen before. Even his skin color was different.
Oh,
And we're
wow.
like, bro, what the fuck happened? and, he's like, hey man, no words. Um, just life changing. I'm gonna introduce you to these people. So it was funny. So from my perspective, I didn't have PTS. I said before, I never needed to kill anybody.
Hmm.
And in fact, when we got into gunfights, it had been up to me to save lives, and it worked out well. So I even had what some people would consider really traumatizing events. Even those traumatizing events were like infused me with power, like value in the teams kind of thing. So I didn't have PTS in the way that most guys do after spending as much time as I did in combat. I just got really lucky. So I didn't think I really needed all that. However, being around the community, I could just see guys suffering all the time. And even then, even when I didn't know anything about really anything, I found myself holding space with these guys as they were struggling through. And it occurred to me that one thing that I would really love to do post Navy career was be some kind of like a PsyD or a psychologist or something to help with veterans and PTS. Turns out I went to do the Trident approach instead, but it's funny because there's not a lot of difference between psychotherapy and what we do with the Trident approach anyway in our coaching and leadership development and that kind of thing. But I went down, I was introduced to them, and there just happened to be another um, retreat going on at the time, and I just saw them saving the lives of my brothers, like literally right from under my nose. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. I'd never experienced or seen or even heard of anything like this, and it's just hard to explain. My mind didn't know how to process any of it. And then they said, "Hey, we got an extra dose if you want." I'm like, "I'm not in the military anymore. I don't have post-traumatic stress. Like, I'm good. Like, let's do it. There's nothing. I'm not gonna have to work through the same stuff that these guys are working through." And that medicine happened to be 5-MeO DMT, which some consider to be the most powerful psychedelic in the world. And for those that don't know, the journey lasts like 15 or 20 minutes. It's not long, like compared to Ibogaine or ayahuasca or anything. And I took the medicine, and because I didn't know anything about anything, I didn't even know about the whole idea of resistance, like resisting the medicine or anything like that. I was just gone, like instantly gone. And I had the experience that I hear everybody talking about what value 5-MeO has to bring. I experienced, I think, all of it in my first journey, and got it like flipped me inside out in a lot of ways, and it taught me so all this stuff. But the first words I could utter when I came out of the medicine was, "How can I help?" And they said, "Well, we're here every weekend, and we got a waiting list about a year and a half long, so you can come down as many times as you want to support these guys going through." And so I did, and a little less than a year later, I found out that there was such a thing as a psychedelic integration coach. So I went to school for that, became one of those, and I've been sitting with veterans and even now executives with psychedelic medicine ever since. Just like our Pathfinder said, it's just life changing. No words.
Beautiful. What was that post integration period like for you after this dose of medicine?
I happen to not have a structured integration process when I went through. So I was kind of left to my own devices,
Hmm.
which was silly because I didn't know anything. I still don't know anything, but the difference was back then I thought I knew things that were 100% not true. And so I was using those as kind of like my mile markers to sort of assimilate back into real life, with some of those mile markers being completely obliterated on 5-MeO DMT, like this, hey, this is not a thing. This doesn't exist. And, but I think the one thing that really helped me was because I decided, and it wasn't even decided, I was like driven to continue being connected with this organization and going down week after week after week, just being with the guys as they were experiencing their own journeys and that kind of thing was helping me in my own way integrate and learn, integrate the lessons that I learned a little more deeply than I did than when I was in the medicine itself. But also just hearing about their processes and that kind of thing. And then for sure, I started to go more deeply down the integration path when I went to psychedelic integration coaching school. And then, yeah, it just went on from there. So kind of the integration never stops. There's always learning, there's always healing. But for my part, at the time, I didn't have any integration coaching at all, which is, now that I think about it, is that it's not something I would ever do or recommend to anybody going through these medicines.
Right. Without giving away too much, what are the tenets or what is your process when if somebody wants to sign up for your Trident Approach program, and then how did that shift post your medicine experience and now integrating the medicine as part of your program?
Before psychedelics, I was under the illusion that our program was for everybody.
Hmm.
It just depended on whether or not they were ready for that. Because everything I do has to matter to me. Um, I'm never, or I don't think there's ever going to be a time where I dedicate my life to something that doesn't matter all that much. Like it has to mean something huge in order for me to dedicate my time and energy and love and space and everything. It's got to be like this enormous thing. So because of that, even before psychedelics, even before psychedelics, um, I always lived in this deep space. When I was a kid, I lived in a very, very deep space. I would always have very deep conversations with people around me, and most of the time they didn't know what I was talking about and all this stuff. But we that was how we went about teaching leadership in the Trident approach. We get into culture, trust, and leadership and all this stuff, but deeper ways of looking at leadership and how I communicate under stress, how I work as a team under stress, and all these things. I couldn't really reconcile that people just don't give a shit about that. Not a lot of people do. You know, they like the surface level awareness, surface level existence. It's comfortable for them. It doesn't poke and prod at them. All of these things, at least on the surface, that's where it appears to be. So when people start to hear that we were going deep in those ways, you know, we had a tremendous amount of success with people who went through our program. And then at the same time, with other people who went through our program, we scared the crap out of them, you know, and we just weren't ready for that. Just didn't want to look at the self in that way. And then we found psychedelics and we went deeper. So, um, so what we found is we're finally able to come to the understanding that our program just isn't for everybody. It is only for people who truly want to go to the deepest core of the self and just see what's going on there. Because when you can see what's going on there, it can help you understand how you respond in times of stress, why it is you lead the way you do, why you talk the way you do, why you treat people the way you do, all of those things. And when you start shifting and shaping the self from that deeper level to precisely what you want it to be, what comes out of that is you're finally in your power. You are finally as you are, instead of being fear, making decisions based out of fear, making assessments or judgments based out of scarcity, and all of these things that can have really negative impacts on people and how you lead other people and all that. So, you know, it's funny. We started deep with the Trident approach, and then psychedelics came, and we just went to the core, which I didn't even know existed back then. You know, I didn't know anything about all that stuff when we first. I thought we were deep in the Trident approach, and we were, but not even close to kind of where we are now. So psychedelics are illegal, and we don't do plant medicine for people in the States. What we do, however, is we create like these Navy SEAL based training events that are our best attempt at creating psychedelic like experiences, but without the medicine. So essentially what that can look like is, we run people through these stations that from the outside look like these mini Navy SEAL missions, and they're fun to do. But on the inside, you're really, really being challenged to just allow yourself to see yourself as you are. And what's hard about it, or what I might say is like psychedelic about it, mind manifesting or bringing like a deeper awareness, is most people are not necessarily happy with how they show up when things are kind of out of their control. And so the Trident approach is like a training ground for them to, number one, see how they respond when things are kind of going out of their control. But then number two, once they see that, they can make corrections and do it again, this time in the way that they would hope or prefer to show up as leaders. And it's fun. And it's all good. You know what I mean? Like nobody's going to get hurt or anything like that. This is just a game, a fun, very powerful game, and not only helping you to see yourself as you are, but also giving yourself the tools to shape and shift yourself in the way that you want to be. So when Monday comes around and the stress ball comes running through the hallways, you're like, I know how to respond to this. I've got practice in this. And then, so those are the beach events. And then we do have times like, for example, November 2nd through the 8th, we're doing a ayahuasca for leaders retreat in Tarapoto, Peru, with an organization that I know very well. They're called La Medicina, really, really powerful Shipibo healers. And it is an ayahuasca retreat. And once we help them integrate what, the normal things that come out of these psychedelic experiences, we then take it a step further and be like, okay, how can we implement this into how we lead, how you lead your organizations and that kind of thing. So But not everybody does that. Very few people do that. In fact, we still have some slots open for that. But those are for the people who understand what this world is. They're not afraid of it, and they see nothing but growth and potential that comes out of it. Well, those are the people that really, really have the ability to kind of suck the marrow out of the Trident approach for all that it's worth, and really kind of catapult themselves into how they lead.
Beautiful. I'm curious, when you chat with people who want to be part of the Trident approach or veterans, who want access to medicine, do you recommend the 5-MeO DMT as your preferred medicine of choice, or do you work with shamans who use ayahuasca or some of these other plant medicines?
Well, it depends. So the medicines that I'm most familiar with are 5-MeO DMT, ibogaine, ayahuasca, psilocybin, and MDMA. Um, I don't recommend a medicine to really anybody unless they tell me kind of all the things that they're working with. And sometimes it's very clear, what medicines would be really helpful. For example, like if somebody has traumatic brain injury, they got really terrible memory, all of those things, ibogaine seems to be like the medicine of choice there.
Hmm.
But from there, it kind of just depends. I feel like, so what I do is I tell them exactly that, hey, these are the medicines that I'm familiar with. I don't talk about any other medicines because I don't know. There could be, amazing. I know there are amazing medicines out there, but I don't know enough to say anything about them. But I say, hey, take a look at these medicines, do your own research if that's something you want to do, and then come back and let me know. So like the bigger medicines like ayahuasca, ibogaine, 5-MeO, we have relationships with people who are actual like native healers that um, essentially facilitate and serve those medicines.
Hmm.
Um, but for myself, psilocybin and MDMA are medicines that I facilitate personally. Those are medicines that I have a lot of experience with, and yeah, so it kind of just depends on what they're looking to do. And some of them, for sure, they want multiple day things, um, that kind of thing. And because there are places all around the world that you can do this, a lot of people like to travel and experience these medicines, particularly in some of the more native regions. Just has more connectivity with the medicine somehow. So yeah.
Now, curious, with the emergence of the psychedelic medicines, you yourself have participated in numerous talks and events. What are your thoughts on kind of the rise of this whole industry now around these plant medicines and what people are doing and discovering with the culture?
Yeah, I think there are different cultures within the culture that are starting to get sussed out of this whole thing.
Hmm.
And one of them is so the reason why psychedelics exist in the way that they do to begin with is, and this might be a little slow and deliberate conversation for me because this is only really kind of coming to my awareness really recently. So some of the stuff I haven't really said out loud before, but I've been thinking about it a lot. And so the reason why psychedelics are in the state that they are is because our approach to mental health and medicine as a whole is completely defunct. If it was highly efficient and operative and this kind of thing, psychedelics have been just part of our medicine from the very beginning, thousands of years ago. But they were deliberately taken out of circulation and the process itself because of how effective and powerful they are. And so not a lot of money and pharma and all that stuff.
Hmm.
But with this reemergence of psychedelics community, there is a huge amount of people that I'm noticing that are in the psychedelic space that are still attached somehow to our Western approach of medicine, meaning They go through these certification programs, which are all based around, you know, what we think best practices of practicing medicine are. Like it's this medical clinical approach to psychedelics, which fair enough, hey, the medicine works, it's powerful,
Hmm.
but it's almost like they're going out of their way to remove the soul and the process of cellular connection through psychedelics, which surprises me. One of the big reasons why we need um, psychedelics to begin with, in my opinion, well, a couple of the reasons why. Number one is that we're disconnected from self, like who we really are, who we truly, truly are beyond the thinking mind. Number two, we don't understand the mind for what it is, and just as importantly, what it is not. And then the third piece is we don't necessarily know how to be present. We're always worried about the past or worried about the future, whatever it is.
Hmm.
And psychedelics have a way, number one, to help us connect with who we really are beyond the thinking mind, which there's a soul to that. And so introducing and working with psychedelics purely from a clinical standpoint, from the practitioner side, who is literally like averted to that whole thing, is really surprising to me because you're like missing out. Yes, the medicine still does, and yes, the medicine can still teach, but holding space in the space where there's all of this energy that's going on that we can't see, most of us. As a practitioner, as a facilitator, I feel like you're missing a whole lot. And I think there's so much space for facilitators to be holding space in the medicine where they're actually providing protection to this gap of energy. There's all this energy that's flowing by, and it's positive or negative. And if there's a gap in it, it's going to fill that gap. And if you're holding space and you're not protecting that space from actually happening, I think there's a lot that we can do about teaching, hey, to help mitigate that stuff. And to even potentially pull out negative energy where sometimes it's hard for us to let go. Really powerful facilitators can do that. But there are people who are just not in that space, and it's almost like they're afraid of it, which I get why they're afraid. But that's one of the powerful things that psychedelics do is help you change your relationship to fear.
Hmm.
And it is the way. It's something to be pursued, not to be run from or avoided. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is understanding the mind for what it is and what it isn't. You can't think your way through these things with the thinking mind. It is the reason why you're suffering at all anyway. Well, there's two types of suffering, mental and physical. So short of stubbing your toe on your bed at night, most everything is mental suffering. And so if you're using the mind to take yourself out of the mental suffering, it's just literally is not possible. It's just going to find another avenue for you to mentally suffer somehow. So you have to be, well, you don't have to be, there are plenty of people who don't, and this is what I mean. If you're not able to understand how to circumvent, how to become the observer and separate yourself from that space, how can you really get, I mean, that's really what this is about. How can you get the most out of medicine possible if you're not in that space? Um, and then being present. Being present a lot of times has to do with allowing and not letting the mind fixate to one thing or the other, just being. If that is driven by the mind, it's never just going to simply be. So I've sat with people in medicine where I was on medicine and other facilitators were not, and they were worried the whole time. If somebody's on psilocybin, I got to make sure they're breathing. It's like, what are you talking about? It's like one of the safest things. We do ayahuasca in the jungle in the dark, and we don't know if anybody's. We know they are because they are. It's fine. It's safe. We've already done through all the medical screening and all that. It's fine. But and they're taking notes the whole time and
Hmm.
just worried. And it's like, you don't have to. The medicine is actual medicine. We just have to get out of the way. And the best way that I know how to get it out of the way is to also partake in the medicine and let go and just be the puppet to the medicine. Medicine tells me I need to rattle for somebody or even help them move energy. I just do it. This is not something that I think about. It's something that comes through me through the medicine when I'm connected. So those are two really big communities that I see coming through the psychedelic community as it's expanding. But there's another one, and another one is, people see a gold mine. It's just a terrific, amazing business opportunity to get into the psychedelic community on the ground level so that they can invest in all this stuff. And it was funny. I mean, honestly, it took me a couple of years to go to some of these psychedelic conventions and realize, oh, wait a minute, like not everyone is here just because of love of humanity. like, like there's some people who are like trying to do some not good stuff here. Like that took me a while to learn because I have this habit of just seeing the best in people, generally speaking, when I meet them. And yeah, it blew me away that just coming across some people who somehow they just don't have the best interests of other people at heart. Now it's kind of common information for myself. Now I'm used to it, but it was a shock to me to come recognize that for myself. So there's psychedelics are just like anything now to me. You have angels on earth who are serving in this way, and you have people who are not, who are serving in this way. You have people who are just like any other community you can imagine. We got all the same stuff. So it's not about us. It is about the medicine, and hopefully I'm doing everything I can to get out of the way as much as possible and just serve um, by allowing the medicine to work through me, and that's it.
Well put. There is a place for the authentic and healers and actors as part of this community that's being connected.
I don't think anybody's doing anything wrong per se. It's just different, and there's a whole nother level of potential that's this medicine that I don't think if you're working with energy that you don't get to experience. So essentially, at the end of the day, what it is, you're not getting the most out of the medicine, in my opinion, for what that's worth.
As part of kind of again this emerging community, you mentioned yourself going through a psychedelic coaching course or doing a program like that so you could be an integration coach. What is your opinion of all the different programs that are now out there? What did you particularly like about your education experience and getting certified, and what should somebody look for when they're trying to find the right person to help facilitate like you do?
Well, what I went through Being True to You, um, which is a really great program, and what I like most about that is, they brought me from knowing nothing, which I knew nothing, all the way up until having functional conversation about psychedelics and psychedelic experiences and that kind of thing in a helpful way. I learned about spiritual bypass. I learned about, you know, different medicines, where they came from, some of the dosing,
Mhm.
addiction, all these things, which were just helpful for me, not knowing anything. I think, though, the more that I learn, the more time I have in coaching, it's more about the space that you hold. These coaching programs, and I'm not talking about anyone in specific, but essentially they're there. The more students that get going through their programs, the better. Of course, it's the same for any business. and I know for a fact that there are people who go through these coaching programs who have no interest whatsoever in coaching. It's just for their own information, their own education, their own awareness, their own training, and it's an amazing thing to do that. But for the ones who are actually going to coach, I find that there are many people who go through the coaching process who are not doing well. They're not coming from I'm not going to say healed. I don't know that anybody's ever healed, but some people are still deep within their traumatic experience. Things trigger them, for example, and they respond in ways that they don't necessarily like and or feel like they may not necessarily have control over, and those kinds of things. Like those are some people who are coaches and therapists, psychologists and psychiatrists and social workers and all this stuff. Like people who are literally on the verge of tears like all the time. Like all the time.
Mm-hmm.
They're coaching. They are working as therapists in the space. And from my experience, it's not the tools that we're able to give somebody, it's the space that we're able to hold with them as they're going through their process. So if somebody is a wreck, when oftentimes when you're talking about these psychedelics, especially where I'm at in the veteran space, where these people are, their families are either have fallen apart or are in the midst of falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
They've lost everything. They've lost their limbs, all this kind of, these people are struggling. And to be holding space with somebody who's deeply struggling while you are also deeply struggling, I get it. I mean, there's nothing but love and compassion there. The reason why you're there is because you have love and compassion for humanity. But, I feel like there's an optimal way to do this and a not so optimal way to do this. And I think the optimal way to do this is to be in a place of balance, to be in a place of strength and awareness and have moved through your deepest stuff and come out the other side, so that as a coach, I'm not talking about anyone can listen. In fact, it's the best thing you can do is just listen to somebody. But as a coach or as a therapist, to be in like some of the darkest, deepest, darkest places and just to be able to hold is, I think, the optimal way of doing this. So it's just my opinion.
Of
But
course.
I don't think that that's, I don't know. I don't know what's more or less of. I just see it often. And so as practitioners, however it is, coaches or therapists or whatever you want, I think it's up to us to really do our work first, which can be hard when you spent, 10 years going to school and doing all this stuff. Like sometimes that's how long it takes, or even longer, to really come to a place of resilience. So the space that you're holding is clean, and you actually are protecting others from that energy that could be coming in, and or you yourself are not the energy that is dumping into them that they don't need. Just something I think it's just hard. Who are you going to tell that to? Hey, you're not ready to be a coach. You know what I mean? But something to think about, but for good reason. If you're a coach or a therapist and you're not fully where you could be, and I'm not talking about totally healed. I'm just talking about on the very, very powerful upside of having gone through your own healing journey. What better could you do for the world than healing the self in that way? And then watch what you do for the people that you're sitting with. Yeah, it's a hard conversation. Who would
Right.
want to
But
have
one we
that
should be
conversation
having. But
when we
part of
can be
the
having? Yeah.
right part of the conversation that needs to be had, nonetheless, I feel, these are really powerful medicines, and there I think there should be a way to honorably serve them and receive them versus maybe some of the, as you say, business types who want to get in on this industry. Now we've got DMT vape pens hitting the market, and psilocybin gummies in fun packaging. Again, curious, how you serve and receive medicine now, with the things that you see out there as part of the scene.
I think the most
Should
important,
people be allowed to have access to them, or should we keep these, as part of a reserved ceremonial use?
so should is a hard word for me.
Hmm.
It just is happening. Um, I don't think it is up to me, regardless of all the stuff that I just said, because it's true. It's just my opinion. I don't think it should be up to me what should be or should not be. I'm just here. I'm just observing, and in my mind, I can have what I think are better ways to do things. But it's not for me to say that you're not healed, therefore you should not. That's People are working with this medicine who have no idea about energetic implications. Um, how they, it's already happening, and people are getting healed or put on the healing path and all that stuff. So it's not like it's just this evil or anything, and especially when they're doing it from a place of love. I mean, come on. But with the DMT pins and the gummies, I have an amazing relationship with the company called Nootropics. Just amazing dudes. Uh, so amazing. They're doing so well financially. They came to me last year and they said, "Hey Diego, it's nice to meet you." And we'd never met before. Like, it's nice to meet you. Just letting you know that we're crushing business wise when we want to give back, and we've chosen to give back by giving free psilocybin to veterans, and we're choosing you to be our point person on that. And I was just blown away. And since that day, they've given me over $4,000 worth of product to distribute to veterans in the community for absolutely no cost. And they have gummies. You know, I think gummies are what seems to me like people who are just getting into the scene, so to speak. Gummies are an easy transition because they taste good, they work well. It's just easy. You're not carrying around like a mushroom or whatever, doing microdosing and that kind of thing. So for sure, I think there's pure value, and I think the biggest value, just like the way I feel like about like therapists and coaches and stuff, is just the biggest deal is how much do you trust these people, like who's actually making the medicine and what kind of energy is going around as the medicine is being grown and cult, all that stuff. And these guys at Nootropics, I already know, they're just like angels on earth. They're all they want to do is the right thing. So chocolates and things that they serve, the gummies that they serve, all of that aren't necessarily something you would go foraging around the forest to find and sitting with it, and that's sort of the traditional way, but still just powerful healing and development and learning comes from the way they're distributing this way regardless. And I've also had people come up to me in trade shows, and in 10 seconds, they're like, "Hey, I just wanted to give you this. This is my thing." And I just have this sense. I'm like, "No, thank you." Like, there's just something within me that says, I don't want to know what this is like. I just don't. You just have a sense about people sometimes. I'm not saying that I'm right. I just have to learn to trust that intuition for whatever it is and just move on. Yeah, the 5-MeO DMT pens that that are out there. Now, listen, hey, man, I've done that. I've done that before. I've done it twice in an actual 5-MeO DMT ceremony where they're doing their best to protect the Sonoran desert toads, because you can create literally the same chemical compound through synthetic means and not have to harm the toads. I get that. Um, but I also did it once on the Vegas Strip, and I was like, the guy offered it to me, and I was just like, "Are you serious?" But he's a really good friend of mine. I was like, 5 minutes. He's like, "Yeah, well, you don't hit it like you do like the thing, It's like really." So I took the little tiny thing, and I was just like, "Yeah, I don't think it's my deal." Because it's just seeing the potential. Like if somebody doesn't know, and they're just like, "Hey, yeah, like let's go," and I don't know, man. Again, like I don't know that I'm the one who I am not the one who would be saying we should or should not, but you could just see where that could go. And imagine when somebody thinks that's a regular vape pen or cannabis or I don't know if they do MDMA or whatever. Imagine that, and then but it turns out to be 5-MeO DMT, dude.
I've heard
It's
those
just
horror
gone,
stories
brother.
of somebody hitting the bong and they didn't know their friends sprinkled some DMT on top and you know blasted them to the
Yeah,
moon.
it's like, and there's no, you're just on the ride. There's no
Hmm.
early exit. It's just that's it. you know.
Was it therapeutic for you, putting your story and all your thoughts down into a book and what was your creative process like and what did you want to accomplish with this first release?
I knew that I wanted to write a book. No, no, I had to write a book, but it was mostly for the Trident approach. We wanted to kind of like a business card of sorts. Um, and I have all kinds of stories, and I love telling stories, and so it just made sense that book was the way to go. But I didn't know what book I was going to be writing. I have a really interesting life, so I didn't know if it was going to be a memoir. I don't know if I was going to write about Navy SEAL leadership, psychedelic, therapy for veterans. Like I just didn't know what this book was going to be. So I just started writing and writing and writing. And over the course of like 4.5 years, I wrote like 200,000 words. And there was no sense to it. There was no organization to it. It wasn't like filed properly. There was just stuff everywhere. It was crazy. Um, but it just became so much that I ended up getting lost. But it kind of didn't matter. It was fine. So what? I just didn't know where I was. It's okay. So I just set it off mentally to the side. And then I did ayahuasca for the first time. And it happened that where I did ayahuasca, this place called La Medicina in Tarapoto, Peru, they have this incredible tiny library. There's like 100 or 200 books of just plant medicine, Eastern philosophy, all this kind of stuff. Well, when I did ayahuasca and the whole idea of the book just being hanging out there in the ether, it came into my journey. And ayahuasca said, "Hey, your book can belong in that library down there if you wanted to." And I was like, right there, like I knew immediately what I wanted the book to be about. I went home, and from there I started writing chapter one. I didn't even look at the 200,000 words I had written. It was all over the place anyways. It didn't matter. I started writing chapter one, and 5 months later, I rewrote the whole thing, and it was totally ready. And then I gave it to an amazing editor, and and it took him from February to December to edit the whole thing because I'm not a writer, and well, I should say an educated or trained writer, we'll say. And yeah, he really nailed it, man. And yeah, we finally published it back in December, and so it went from 200,000 words to like 76,000 words. And the cool thing about that, without knowing what book I was going to write, is we already have another book essentially already written. So the book that we have now is Leading from the Deep, and the book that is nearly ready to go into publishing now is called Healing from the Deep. So just talking about healing, and then we have some words already written for a third book. We're going to call that Learning from the Deep. So learning from beyond the thinking mind, or tapping into the knowing that exists within all of us. So yeah, it was good not knowing what was going on. I've got a bunch of frameworks and stuff. It's just a matter of cleaning all of it up and consolidating it.
Beautiful. What's been exciting to you recently? Do you have any upcoming appearances, and where can people follow you and learn more and sign up for your Trident Approach program?
What's really exciting to me is, I go to Peru about 5 times a year with Heroic Arch Project and sit with veterans there. And as I'm doing that, I'm also taking the medicine. And the last time I did ayahuasca was a particularly rough span of 3 days of medicine journeys, which caused a lot of confusion. I just didn't understand it. Normally, if I have a really hard journey that's painful or scary or something like that, it's just like nothing but learning points along the way. Like, oh, okay, I'll get my act together here. I got to fix this and that. But this one was just like a shellacking that didn't make any sense to me, and it just was getting hammered, and I just didn't know why. And what I'm coming to understand, or to think, what I'm coming to think is that what it was doing was clearing, like I'm leveling up a lot. And it was doing that by creating space. And so that's what all that pain was for, was just removing stuff that I was finally ready to release. I had never really I experienced that once on the Ibogaine early on, like way back in 2019, but I didn't know what that was. This time I kind of know what it is. And so that's what it's exciting to me, is that my own personal journey is like an overdrive. And this whole idea of what I was talking to you before about energy and working with the medicine in an energetic way, that is beginning to explode for myself and the people that I'm holding space for. It's not managing them through. It's just, it doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes medicine's like, hey, you need to help this person. And yeah, that's super cool to me. That's the reason why that's so exciting, is because it's so unknown to me. It's not, and it's not typical. It's unusual, at least in my experience. It's very usual for many, many, many people. They don't even have to think about it. But for me, it's new. I'm excited about that. The appearances that I have coming up is at the end of, I'm actually going to Peru for 2 weeks at the end of the week. And then going to Anchorage, Alaska for Arctic Visions. I'm doing it on one day and then doing a fireside chat the next day, all having circle around psychedelics and veterans healing and learning development, that kind of thing. So that's like August 20 something. Let me just do that just for 23rd, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th. And where you can find me is our website is thetridentapproach.com, all 3 words, thetridentapproach.com. And the social media that I spend pretty much the most time on is on LinkedIn. And so my first name is Diego, just like San Diego. And my last name is Ugalde, which Ugalde. Hopefully you put it in the notes. But yeah, that's where people can find me.
Beautiful. Well, Diego, thank you for the beautiful conversation here, and thank you for sharing with our audience.
Thanks, Colin. We've been talking about this for a while. So it was good to get it in.
Great. That was excellent. That was really awesome, man.